Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Tinsley. I am a member of NABJ's Entrepreneurship Task Force, and we welcome you to our masterclass about independent journalism. And we are excited this evening to have Georgia Fort with us and Ryan Sorrell to just share their experiences as independent journalists. So we'll get started. We're glad to have our participants here, our guests, and we'll have Wayne just go over the introductions, but also want to just highlight the Entrepreneurship Task Force. We are part of the National Association of Black Journalists, where our goal is to be able to enlighten our membership regarding opportunities regarding entrepreneurship within the journalism industry. And so moving forward, we just want to offer classes, workshops, anything that we can to help our membership grow and just learn all about opportunities outside of the corporate environment of journalism with news organizations and with the industry changing at a rapid pace here. It's just good to know about other opportunities that are available to all of us. So we'll get started with Wayne and then we'll move forward into our discussion. Welcome, and we look forward to a very enlightening, powerful conversation.
Indeed, indeed. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, for the alley. Shanae Williams, our chair. We greatly appreciate everybody here. Britt, our advisor. Real quick, please make sure you follow us on our socials. The NABJ Task Force, Entrepreneurship Task Force. It's on Instagram. It's NABJ as in elf, T as in Tom, F as in Frank. So make sure you follow us there, and also follow us on Facebook, where we get notifications. We get you notifications through that, and also there should be a link that I'll put in the chat to sign up if you would like to join the task force and join on a committee. We greatly appreciate that, so we can build some of the work up or whatnot, so we can keep bringing you some great stuff. All right. So without further ado, I'm gonna do my introductions. First up, we have Georgia Fort. She's a three-time. Oh, 1 second, John. All right. She's a three-time Midwest Emmy Award-winning journalist. She was one of the two journalists in the courtroom for the sentencing of Derek Chauvin. Her mission as a storyteller is to change the narrative by amplifying truth, citing diverse sources, and contextualizing social justice issues. For over 15 years, her work ethic and powerful approach to storytelling has distinguished her as a thought leader on equitable journalism practices. In 2023, she launched the independently produced news program, Here's the Truth, that was nominated for 12 regional Emmys, and she won 3 of them. Ford has been awarded by the National Association of Women in Business, Minneapolis Business Journals 40 Under 40, the Minnesota Society of Professional Journalists, and more. She is a mother of 3 and wife of the professional boxer Cereso Fort. Did I say that correctly?
Close enough. Ceriso Fort.
Cereso. My apologies. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank
Not
you
no
so
problem.
much.
Thanks for being here. All
It's a
right.
pleasure. Thank you.
Indeed. So Ryan Sorrell, correct?
Yes, yeah, you said that perfectly.
Oh, see. I got one of the two correct. So Ryan has a diverse background, including working at one of the nation's most esteemed Black think tanks, one of Chicago's top tech PR agencies, a top 3 global PR firm, and founded one of Kansas City's largest Black-led abolitionist direct action groups during the 2020 uprisings. He is a key organizer in October 21 days occupation on the grounds of Kansas City's City Hall following the horrific brutalization of a 9-month pregnant Black woman by a KCPF officer. And formerly, he was temporarily suspended from his college at Loyola University of Chicago for organizing the largest social justice demonstration in university history, before being pardoned by the president in the university's first ever pardon resulting from the nation's outcry. All right. Let me speed up a little bit. He's lectured internationally from the Kansas City Art Institution, to the University of Arts in London in the United Kingdom and has trained at Google's Communicators Bootcamp. He has more. We'll make sure we post that. He has a very lengthy but very respected, informative bio. So, Ryan, we greatly appreciate you for being here, sir.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Indeed, indeed. All right. So we got our introductions together. Lisa, you ready to take the reign?
Yes, so we will dive in, and we would like to just begin with Georgia and just give us like a background on how you moved from TV news to independent journalism. Like, what was it that clicked to say, hey, maybe I should make a pivot and go into independent journalism?
I really wish that I just had that incredible foresight to know that this was the thing that everybody would be doing now in 2025. But my journey to independent journalism was probably similar to Don Lemon's and Joy Reid's. I was working as an anchor at a NBC affiliate in Duluth, Minnesota. I covered a story about the current chief of police's family's tie to a triple lynching. It was actually his great aunt who incited the lynching. And about 2 weeks after that story aired, he exclusively sat down, did an interview with me. First time he ever talked about it on camera. 2 weeks later, I was terminated, but not for the story. They said it was because I wasn't eligible for maternity leave. So, kind of either way you look at it, whether it was for the story or whether it was because I wasn't eligible for maternity leave, it really just felt like they kind of found any reason to push me out the door because of the storytelling that I wanted to prioritize. And so I was actually hopeful that I would land another contract in my hometown where I wanted to work. But here in Minnesota, as people now know, it's actually a little racist in the north too, and they wouldn't hire me despite the fact that I had 12 years of experience. I had several Emmy nominations in different regions. And so I was, really down about it because I, like many of you on this call, believe in the power of storytelling. And it's something that's just really meaningful to me. And so it took a few years. I think that was in like 2018. But then when George Floyd was murdered right here in my home state, I was paying attention to a lot of the news coverage and just really disappointed in the way it was portraying my community. I didn't really feel like they were getting the stories that were here on the ground, having the nuance, having the context of being from this neighborhood. And so I just started telling stories on my own Facebook page. I had worked as a multimedia journalist, which I tell people in TV, that's just a fancy word for a reporter with their own camera. So I had already had the skill set of going out and filming my own interviews, editing my own interviews, having to script my own, news package, doing the voiceover, doing all of it, right? And so I just took those same skill sets that I used when I worked in broadcast television, and I just started doing it on social media. And before I knew it, my following went from 6,000 to, well over 100,000. We reached 18 million people in just a few months. I ended up being one of the only independent journalists who had access to the Chauvin trial, one of two who was in the courtroom when he was sentenced. And so definitely probably on the front end of leading the wave of independent journalism. Now it's going mainstream, but yeah, it wasn't something that I was just like, oh, I want to do that. It kind of happened naturally. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and we'll dive into more a little bit later about what happened when you really launched your independent organization. So, Ryan, you went from agency work and also with your college education at Loyola in Chicago. Please tell us how you were able to start the Kansas City Defender, but also how you describe it as a Black-led abolitionist news organization. So I want you to dive into that as well. Just explain your shift.
Yes, and just want to say thank you all again so much for the invitation. My journey, I think in a lot of ways was similar to George's actually, but also in some ways is a little bit different. Um, I started writing when I was in college, and as you mentioned, I actually didn't have any formal journalistic background whatsoever before I started The Defender. I started school in 2013 and went through 2017, and so that was essentially during the time of the emergence of Black Lives Matter. And I actually started a Black college newspaper when I was in school in Chicago at Loyola. And so that was really my introduction. I also had a lot of similar sentiments around being extremely discontent with a lot of the existing media landscape and how they would use euphemisms very frequently to say things like racially tinged rather than just plainly calling something racist. And so just that kind of sentiment for me made me start to dive into understanding the history of both the underground press, but also the radical Black press. And so I graduated. I got my first job at a PR agency doing data analytics and web development. And I was doing that for about 2 years, which I think was actually a very, I didn't know it at the time, but it was going to become a very essential skill set for me when I did start The Defender. I learned a lot around SEO and algorithms, and a lot of those skills were very transferable. And again, I was working at that agency for about 2 years up until 2020. In 2020, of course, the uprisings break out. I temporarily came back to Kansas City to visit my parents for what I thought was just going to be a few days. And I went to the Plaza area in Kansas City, and I just saw thousands and thousands of people out there. And so I basically joined the movement. A few days later, I quit my corporate job in Chicago and I moved back to Kansas City. I became a full-time organizer, and I was doing that for about a year, full-time organizing on the ground. And I think, again, similar to what Georgia said, I just looked around at the coverage. I saw so much problematic coverage happening from both the legacy and the corporate media. And what I also observed is what I call the triple layered news desert. A lot of people in journalism are familiar with the first layer of what we call just news deserts. Some people are familiar with the second layer of what we might call a Black news desert. But then there's this third layer that I call a Black digital news desert. And those are places where you might have a Black legacy news outlet. But for instance, at the time, our Black news outlet, which is 107 years old now, at the time, they actually didn't have a website or any social media platforms. And so that's what I would call a Black digital news desert. And there's also, really across the country, there's a large swath of regions that don't have news outlets that reach young Black people. And so that was really the motivation for me starting The Defender. I started The Defender in July of 2021. Within a few months, we broke some of our first, what became national stories. And within the first year, we broke a story on, and I'll get into this a little bit later. This is kind of just the accelerated version, but within the first year, we broke what to date is probably still one of our largest and most important stories that we've ever broken, which was around a white supremacist serial killer that was targeting Black women on a street called Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, which I broke the story in September of 2022. And over the weekend, which I had talked to at least 4 or 5 different independent sources, all who were saying that Black women were going missing off of this street called Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, which there actually was another serial killer in the 90s who was targeting Black women on that exact same street. But I broke the story on a Friday. It essentially went viral over the weekend. By that Monday, our police department came out and said, these are completely unfounded rumors and there's no basis to support these claims. They said that without having ever reached out to me to find out who my sources were, how I got my information. They basically just put that out there. All of the corporate media and legacy media in the city parroted exactly what the police department said, and even national news outlets, including Newsweek and the Atlanta Black Star, also both took precisely what the police department said and named us as essentially spreading misinformation and fake news. And so there was about a 3-week time span where we were pretty much blackballed for having published that initial story. And then 3 weeks later, in early October, I believe it was October 6th, 2022, a Black woman escapes from an actual basement torture dungeon about 30 in a city called Excelsior Springs, about 30 minutes outside of Kansas City. And she tells investigators and detectives that she had been kidnapped off of Prospect Avenue in early September, and that 2 of her friends had also been killed by the same guy who had kidnapped her. And so from that story, that again, that's kind of, I tell that story because from that moment, we just had this huge influx of people in our community who reached out to me. At the time, I was the only full-time person in the organization. A lot of people reaching out, wanting to volunteer with our organization, basically just saying, what can we do? To the point where I literally started hosting community meetings in my apartment building. And that also gave birth to the second half of our organization, which I'll get into later, but our organization is half media operation, half community organization. And so that moment and having those community meetings gave birth to the second half of our organization, which again is why we call ourselves an abolitionist organization. We're rooted in anti-carceral philosophy. We really take a lot of our philosophy and reason for existence from the history of the radical Black press, looking all the way back to Freedom's Journal, which was also an abolitionist organization that was birthed in a Black church, actually. But yeah, that's just kind of the fast version.
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, and I have in my notes that we will go over your community work as well with the grocery events and also the clothing drives as well. So thank you for sharing that. So we want to go back to like day one when you said, okay, I am an independent journalist, and Georgia, y'all can go back and forth, but Georgia, you had a social media following, but once you started telling your own stories, then how did you move forward with that, like on your day one with your sources and what stories to tell? Because I'm sure it was a lot that you wanted to cover, but how did you move forward with that? And Ryan, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think the work has been very intuitive, because this is my hometown, because I'm from here. I know a lot of key community leaders. I know a lot of the officials and which ones have strong track records who are trusted, and which ones are only showing up at election time, trying to get our votes, right? And so after I started the journey, I always tell people like 2020 was like obviously not the ideal time to start a business. We were in the middle of a pandemic, with so much going on, but I didn't really start a business with the intention of like making a whole bunch of money. I just knew that I wanted to be able to continue telling the stories. And so I describe launching the company almost as like trying to reverse engineer a business model. Um, and so that aspect of it, I think, in terms of financially sustaining the work, has been a challenge. But we have remained committed on not compromising what our values are, what our editorial values are. And then the piece around sources and like what stories we cover. Um, I think it's similar to when you work in a traditional newsroom, right? When you have to go to that editorial meeting, you have a list of stories that you want to pitch. You have a list of stories that are important to you, that you believe are important to your community. And you're going to go and you're going to petition to your newsroom that this is what should be covered today, right? That this is what you want your assignment to be. And so, how do you come up with those stories? I mean, it's who you're connected to in community, who you're connected to at church. It's the Facebook post that you saw. There's so many different ways in today's world and how we get information. The text message you got or the email, right? And so that editorial guide is still there. And so I think the challenging thing for us, because we are also a very, small organization, usually we just don't have enough capacity to meet the demand for the amount of story submissions that are coming into us each day, each week, and each month.
Yes. Okay. And Ryan, what was your day one like?
Yeah, I think I even prior to starting the Defender, I was actually doing like a lot of digital consulting for civil rights, like Black and civil rights organizations in Kansas City. I had come up with like this whole slide deck of what I thought that the Defender could be, but I just like didn't even know when to start it. And it got to the point where I was talking to Gwen Grant, who's the president of the Urban League in Kansas City, who I was doing digital consulting for at the time. And she was saying how much we needed like a young Black media platform. And I showed her the pitch deck that I had created. And she was like, you need to stop working for me right now and launch this thing. And so like maybe a month or two later, that was when I started. And day one, really, like even the first few months was me just renting a video camera from this like video camera rental space in Kansas City, and just going to our 18th and Vine Jazz District, which is where a lot of Black, that's like the party spot, basically. Like a lot of people go to parties and like clubs and all kinds of stuff there. And I was literally just interviewing Black people on the street as they were coming out the club or going to a party or something like that, and just asking like, what do Black people, like, what are you up to tonight? And what do Black people do in this area, basically? Even me and my friend, who I also, maybe he joined the Defender maybe about a month or two after I started. We even went to places literally outside of like a liquor store and just were interviewing people, everyday people, just like saying, what do you want to tell Kansas City, basically? And so those were like the very early days. And it was, we also interviewed, we had what we call like the Black Arts Project. And so we were interviewing poets, doing like exclusive video interviews. And for us, that was always a very important entry point. I knew that because of my political and organizing background, that was always like my long-term vision, was being able to have actual political influence and political power and utilize our platform in that way. But as an entry point, I knew that I wanted to reach young people. And I knew that young people, especially like high school and sometimes even college age, aren't really interested in very hard like news topics or hard political news. And so having that entry point around like, where do people go to parties, or the Black Arts Project and interviewing poets and rappers. And we were also very into the hip hop scene. That kind of roundabout entry point enabled us to build an audience and also to build trust with young Black people, which that's something that, and again, in journalism spaces, we often have this conversation around how do we build trust with communities. And that's something that doesn't really come up that much, is like shooting promotional videos for a party promoter, but doing it for free and telling him we don't want anything in return. We just want you to know we are doing something for the betterment of the Black community, basically. And so just know like we'll be here in the future, and just building that kind of trust with or also putting out things like the top 10 rappers to watch this year. That builds like a level of cultural authority, which for young people, young Black people in particular, is a form of trust. And so those were like the very early stages, I would say. And then from there, we already had like young people in our audience. So a lot of these young people would start to reach out to us whenever racist things would happen in their schools, and the schools wouldn't be doing anything about it. And so the students started to reach out to us on Instagram just through the DMs. And that was actually how now we have like a very large high school and college age audience. And it came about because students knew that they would say things like, my white teacher is repeatedly saying the N-word, and I went to the administration and the administration didn't do anything about it. So now I'm coming to you all. Can you please publish something about this? And so we basically built up a reputation of being an organization that young people could come to if they were experiencing that type of harm in their school environments. So yeah, those were kind of the earlier stages. Now we do all kinds of like actual investigative journalism, we've expanded to everything from like documentaries to our newsletter platform, podcast, website, email newsletter. But those were just like the early days for us.
Oh, all right, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that, and we'll come back to you because I wanted to ask Georgia about like her growth to where she is now with acquiring a radio station. Was it Power 104.7, I believe?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
and also your documentaries and then your local television show. So yeah, just please tell us how you expanded into those areas as well, and also,
Yeah.
also congrats on the radio station.
Thank
That's
you.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and as I was listening to Ryan reminisce about his early days, I mean, there were so many memories that were coming back to like, you know, just streaming from our phone, not having equipment, 18-hour days. But one thing that I want to add on to what Ryan said before answering how we've expanded, the piece Ryan mentioned about the building trust. you know in the early days of our independent journalism, our equipment wasn't as good as the mainstream media outlets. um Sometimes we weren't as fast as them. Our sets definitely, if we even had access to a studio, right? But the thing that started to differentiate us and really allowed us to build an audience was that trust. And I think coming from mainstream media and seeing that, there are these principles that are reinforced in mainstream media, that you have to talk a certain way to be trusted and you have to look a certain way to be trusted. But to be able to be independent and define authentically how you build trust with your community more authentically, I think that has been one of our most valuable, our trust with our community is our most valuable currency. And so, yes, we built this momentum after, providing um, a lot of breaking coverage after the murder of George Floyd, providing 24-hour coverage during the trial after the murder of Dante Wright. And so we had a trial, and then after the trial, we had protests. And those protests sometimes lasted like 8 hours. And then after that, we had press conference. So, I mean, we literally became like a 24-hour news channel on digital because we were covering all those things. And it was really just like one or two of us at that time. And so there was a lot of momentum for our work. There was a lot of support and buy-in from our local community because, the juxtaposition of mainstream media here sometimes only centering the voices of or the statements of officials, also like Ryan was saying, how the police department denounced this and they actually were wrong. That's happened here so many times. There's been so many times where our local authorities have been wrong on something and we've been right. And so it strengthens that trust. And so the community rallied behind us. We were able to launch a campaign to produce a television show. We were able to get a contract with the CW Twin Cities and it lasted about 3 seasons. And that series called Here's the Truth was a 30-minute program weekly that aired Saturdays at 11 a.m. It went on to be nominated for a total of 12 regional Emmys, and we won 3. And I actually have 2 ventures. So I have a for-profit, and that is called Black Press. That is the entity that produced the television show and where I have done the publishing of my own independent journalism. And then I also launched a nonprofit because one thing that we were hearing from a lot of local newsrooms was like, oh, we're not really getting a lot of diverse candidates. And so we wanted to mobilize the next generation to advance representation in media. And so to create a pathway to develop a workforce of diverse media talent. And we've actually received a ton of funding for that. I also was incentivized to start this other venture because in order to acquire the radio station, you did have to have 501c3 status. And so that was kind of like the final nudge for me to branch out what started out as a project in the for profit and allow it to become its own venture. And so we acquired 104.7 FM, which services the east side of St. Paul, a neighborhood in the capital city of Minnesota. And it is one of the most diverse and one of the most dense neighborhoods in the city. It's also one of the most underfunded neighborhoods. It's on the brink of gentrification. And so while on one side of my work, we're receiving like these regional awards, on the other side of my work is very, very hyper local, focusing on one neighborhood. And overall, what I have found as a person who really just started all of this just because I wanted to tell the stories, right? What I have found in my pathway through independent journalism is that I needed an ecosystem to be able to sustain myself and to support the vision that I'm trying to create.
All right, Ryan, we'll have you chime in.
Yes, on which specific part of the question?
Oh, yes, just as far as like when you got started and like how where you are now and how you got to that point.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Am I able actually to share my screen at all?
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, I think Wayne might be able to help us with that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes, to where you have the newsletter and podcasts and your community events.
Yes, yeah, I'll just go ahead and share this. This is our organizational model right here. And it's called the Defenders Radical Organizational Map. And essentially, as I was mentioning earlier, how we started off as what I would call a media operation or media organization. And so again, we view ourselves, in total, we view ourselves as a community organization that happens to do media and news as opposed to an entirely media organization. And so on the left side here, this is kind of where we were conceived, which was on that media operations side. And so that includes everything from our social media channels to our email newsletter to our video podcast. All of that falls under this editorial wing side. And then again, as I mentioned, from that situation, that very, really horrifying situation that occurred with the young Black woman, since those meetings that I started to have in my apartment building, that kind of gave birth, as I mentioned, to the community program side of the organization. And so now we actually have 3 different committees under community programs. And so the first one is what we call mutual aid. And so that includes free clothing program that we provide for the community. We also have this is actually an outdated term, it's called the Hamer Free Food Program. That originated because we've been doing a lot of coverage on the ongoing slashes to everything from SNAP benefits to one of our largest Black-owned grocery stores just closed in the past 2 months. And so we actually were able to pull together all of the Black farms in Kansas City. And we launched a new program called the Hamer Free Food Program, named after Fannie Lou Hamer. And we were able to raise money to provide the Black farms so that they could increase their crop production, and ultimately so that we could create these free food boxes that we've been delivering to people that live within a 1-mile radius of the Black-owned grocery store that closed down. Lastly, under mutual aid, we have what's called the Miss Willow's campaign. This is also a recent part of our expansion. Last year, Miss Willa, who's an 84-year-old Black elder, she runs the oldest and longest standing Black bookstore in the state of Missouri. She also has a collection of 20,000 books. Over 1,000 of those are rare books, including first edition Frederick Douglass, first edition Zora Neale Hurston, first edition W.E.B. Du Bois, and going back to some of the first books ever written by Black people in the United States. last year, she was going to have to essentially sell everything off to just auctioneers because her declining health and gentrification in the area. And so we were able to step in. We started to pay her rent starting in August of last year, all the way up through this year. And now we're actually inheriting her entire archive, and
Wow.
we're operating out of the bookstore as our first physical headquarters. So all of that, again, it comes under our mutual aid committee. The second committee we have is political education. We launched what we call the Be Real Freedom Academy. That stands for Black Radical Education for Abolition and Liberation Freedom School. We launched that in February of this year. That's a 14-week cohort. It's an intergenerational program. So for this is our second cohort that we started 3 weeks ago. Our youngest student is 10, our oldest is 81. And we teach everything from the history of the Black press to intersectionality to even like Dr. Ruha Benjamin and techno-fascism and stuff like that. So all of that falls under our political education committee. And the last committee that we have is arts and culture. So as I mentioned, it's very important for us to continuously reach Black youth and young Black people. And so we host everything from, we've hosted basketball tournaments. We just hosted a basketball tournament for Juneteenth. We also had a cookout for Juneteenth. We've hosted hip hop concerts. We pretty regularly host open mic nights, but we just do like a lot of different arts and culture programming. And so that's kind of the overall structure of the organization. And right now we have we've grown now to 4 full-time staff. We have 8 part-time staff and between 15 to 20 pretty consistent volunteer coordinators on our mutual aid team. We also have a director of revenue and development, but again, that's just kind of how our organization has grown. And even having this structure here was like a very organic evolution of people just like saying, let's host a basketball tournament, let's do this thing. And so it started off as doing these like very disparate kind of one-off things, and then us being able to operationalize those into like an actual structure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was very helpful to see. And it takes us right into the financial part. So financially, how are you able to keep the Kansas City Defender going? And congratulations on all that you're doing. That's amazing. But yeah, what financially, who are your supporters, and how do you get community support for your organization?
Yes. Yeah. I think right now we're a nonprofit organization. And right now I would say we are about 80% or so philanthropic funded or grant funded. And about 50% of that philanthropic funding is local and about 50% of it is national. So we have like probably about 3 or 4 foundations that support us at the local level. At the national level, we get support from the Pivot Fund, from the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund at Borealis. We're a Press Forward grantee, which I'm actually here in Salt Lake City, just finished the Press Forward conference. But yeah, we have, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 different national funders at the national level. So all of that is the philanthropic funding. Again, that supports about 80% of our overall revenue. And then about 15% of our revenue comes from major gift supporters and people who give maybe $10,000 donations. We have one person who, for the past 3 years, has given us $50,000 major gifts. So that accounts for about 15%. And the last 5%, which is what we're trying to grow currently, is advertising and sponsorships, which is like a super small amount of our overall revenue at the moment. But that's an area that we think there's like a lot of potential to grow in.
In Georgia, we'll have you share with us financially how are you able to support your nonprofit and other business ventures.
Yeah, so on the nonprofit side, it's predominantly philanthropic support as well. There is about, I don't know, 6 or 7 local nonprofits that are really behind the youth development and workforce development aspect. Having the focus on news and media, specifically as a career pathway, is just something that no one else in the state is doing. And so lots of support there for that. Also, individual donations. We get some underwriting through our radio station. But yeah, probably 90% is philanthropic. And then on the for profit side, it's actually changed a ton. And so originally, we had a subscription service, and that was helpful. We had corporate contracts, so branded storytelling series that aligned with our mission. We also had received an RFP from Target to do advertising for them, which was a huge opportunity, but I'm sure you guys could all guess how that went, right? We had that contract for 2 years, and unfortunately, it was a part of their DEI initiatives, which they rolled back. And so we did not have an opportunity to work with them a third year, even though we exceeded all of our deliverables and exceeded all the metrics that they were trying to hit for their marketing campaign. And so now, like, really trying to recover from that, because that actually was half of our revenue. And so the for profit company, contrary to what some people might think with the philanthropic dollars, the for profit company has actually received support from the philanthropic sector as well. So Black Press is a recipient of the National Press Forward Fund, which Ryan just mentioned. And then we also are a recipient of the local Press Forward Fund as well. And so I think that's the state of journalism in general, is that the earned revenue side of news and journalism is dying because of social media outlets being, I think, more attractive to corporations for direct advertising. And so we haven't had much luck in recouping those ad dollars from Target, but are still, just weathering the storm and being creative in how we build out our financial model and how we sustain ourselves.
And will you please explain your staffing for the nonprofit and also on the profit side as well?
Yep. So on the nonprofit side, we have 2 full-time employees. We're getting ready to hire our third. We have, I don't know, maybe like a dozen different contractors that we work with. And then our board of directors, which is all volunteers, is about maybe 6 or 7 people now. And then on the for-profit side, as I shared, following the downturn after the Target contract situation, we're really just down to 2 of us. And so we went from having 3 or 4 full-time employees and having also like a dozen contractors, to it being 2 full-time employees and maybe 2 or 3 part-time contractors that we're working with.
Excellent. All right, and Ryan, I'll just have you just go over your staffing. You mentioned about your like finance person or I'm sorry, development person. And so just briefly explain your other staff members as well.
Yes. Yeah. So in terms of our full-time staff, of course, I'm full-time. I was the very first full-time hire, the only full-time person for about the first 3 years almost, or 2.5 years. And then in January of this year was when I hired our first ever full-time person, which was our director of development and revenue. And then in February, we hired our second full-time person, which is our senior editor and director of radical media initiatives. And then in May, we hired our third full-time, first ever full-time reporter. And she is a senior reporter of Black economic justice. And then we also have about 8 part-time people, which range from an operations consultant to strategic partnerships consultant, mutual aid, and Miss Willis campaign lead is one of our part-time positions. Can't remember all of them at this exact moment, but yeah, that's kind of, we also of course have freelancers who we work with. And then again, we have about 15 to 20 people who currently work in a volunteer capacity. Pretty much our entire mutual aid team that I showed you all, that's pretty much entirely volunteer run, just by people in the community. A lot of people who are already organizers, or people who just wanted to be activated and just wanted to be involved in something.
Cool. Now, I would like for you to just briefly highlight your social media strategy. It's like, because earlier you mentioned about young people sending you DMs about stories happening, but if you could just go over your social media strategy on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube as well.
Yes, I don't really know exactly how to compress it precisely, but right now what's always worked well for us, I would say, and even for me, I think that there's like, well, number one is I studied, even I think as Georgia mentioned, I feel like now it's becoming more normalized and like fashionable almost to like study content creators and to study and like learn their strategies and tactics. But when I first started, I think even now there's kind of still a sentiment of like looking down sometimes, like from more traditional media. There's kind of like the sentiment of looking down in a way, for sometimes, and for justified reasons. But I've always like studied content creators, even people who weren't doing any kind of journalism at all. And so I looked at pages, for instance, like just like more popular pop culture pages, whether that's like the Shade Room or and not taking editorial direction from them necessarily, but just in terms of how that, like the Shade Room or Baller Alert, kind of, that was when I first started. But just looking at lots of different pages at the national level that are able to reach young audiences and looking at how they package information. So oftentimes they have like banner on Instagram specifically, they'll have like a picture and they'll have like banner text. And that strategy for us has been like very effective, and it just communicates things very quickly. Doing like the carousel style posts, those are very effective for us. We more recently have been moving into, as a lot of other people, moving into vertical video. But again, for us, when I think we'll hear a lot of talk of like, you're supposed to post every single day, you need to post 10 times a day. And for me, number one, for my own mental health, but also just like because of our capacity, I didn't really think it was super important for us. Like we've gone literally over a month and at times without posting even a single story. And it's because we were like on the ground building actual real relationships with people. And so even that is part of our strategy. Now, of course, we have a larger team, so we can post a lot more frequently, but posting things that matter, I think, and emphasizing that and prioritizing that over just quantity of posting, that's part of our strategy. Choosing a platform that aligns with the demographic that you want to target. And so if you want to be reaching people 18 to 35, then of course, Facebook might not be the number one platform you want to be on. So we are more on Instagram and TikTok. And so I think those are just a few. And also just thinking about the topics that are of interest to your audience. And so again, there's stories that I might not really care too much about, but I know that sometimes we have to keep our younger audience engaged. And so sometimes we will cover things I personally don't really care about, but I know that young people or like high school age people might care about that specific topic. And so we'll cover it just to keep them engaged, so that when we do publish the new jail that just was up for legislation in our city council 2 weeks ago, so that when we publish that, we haven't lost the interest of our younger people. So I think keeping in mind how to keep people engaged continuously. And I think the very last thing is understanding our audiences as individual people. And we also feel like we have a responsibility to, particularly in this moment where everything is crazy and like there's so much demoralizing news, and I personally think there's like a lot of psychological warfare being inflicted on our communities intentionally. And so how can we share and disseminate information that is critically important for our people to know, but how can we also share hope and get people plugged in? And usually at the end of a lot of our posts, we'll include very specific organizations that people, like when that jail was going to be built, at the end of our Instagram post, we included a link and like mentioned an abolitionist or power building organization that people can get connected to fight back against that new jail being built. So I think those are just a few parts of our strategy.
Nice. All right, Georgia, we'll have you explain, then we'll wrap up with one more question, and then we'll get into our Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. I think social media algorithm changes so much that I think it's important to have a fluid strategy, because what our strategy was when we first started is not what our strategy is now. And so a lot of our approach on social has, and just in general to like doing digital reporting overall, taking the expertise we cultivated when we worked in TV news, right? When I was a news anchor, I wasn't, I wasn't like the veteran anchors who had like the privilege of just anchoring. I also had to produce the newscast that I was anchoring. But I didn't get paid for both. I just got paid for one job, right? And I share that because when you're producing for a newscast, there is a different set of editorial skills that you use when you're making decisions about how to present certain stories, right? And so that is the same editorial judgment when you're producing for digital, is not being so committed to one format, right? Because you have the freedom to do a carousel or to do a TikTok style video or to do a podcast or to do an article or to go live. There's a lot of different formats that are available. And so our digital strategy, honestly, is story by story and thinking what format is going to best serve this story and leaning into that. And then sometimes it's capacity. Sometimes we might, find out about something that's really big that's happening on our way home and we don't have equipment. And so instead of saying, oh, I can't cover that, we might just pull up and snap a couple of pictures on our phone, and so that we're still getting the information out to our community. Maybe it's not our best work, but we're still serving our audience. Obviously, there are certain things that we look at in terms of the metrics. And so I would say that's a big thing. When you're producing for digital, is like looking at the analytics of what works and what doesn't work. But to Ryan's point, I mean, we've also had hiatuses where we've had extended periods of time where we weren't publishing stories, and we were able to like just jump right back in like we never left. And so I think it's really about quality over quantity, and not getting to a place where you create some artificial social media strategy that's based on what the platforms say is good, like, oh, you got to post 10 times a day. And now you actually become mainstream media, because now you're sensationalizing information, you're sensationalizing stories, and just trying to fill a quota, as opposed to sharing thoughtful, engaging, and accurate information to your audience. And so I think by not overcommitting to like a strategy of like, oh, it has to be this way, but being a little more fluid and keeping our audience first, I think that has allowed us to be effective. And I guess it is somewhat of a strategy on its own. It's just probably a lot more flexible than what you would experience as a traditional social strategy in corporate.
Yes. Cool. Okay. And then in closing, before our Q&A, where do you see your business in 2030 as an independent journalist?
Ryan, you want to go first?
You can if you have thoughts already.
Um, I mean, I think we need a network, you know. I think that we're seeing an emergence of so many independent journalists now that are doing great work, and everything is so decentralized. And so I think in 2030 it would be incredible to have a hub here, a center for independent media makers. And I open that up a little bit more broadly because while I have centered my work around journalism, I also acknowledge that culturally, in the Black community, as griots, journalism is not the only pathway to get information out to community, and that storytelling can be defined more broadly than journalism. And journalism actually can be kind of confining and even inauthentic sometimes to who we are as a people. And so I think having hubs like independent media center in major cities across the country to provide accessibility to independent media makers who maybe don't have access to the equipment they need to produce stories with excellence, that don't have access to the studio space, to the editing software, the computers. And so I share that to say by 2030, I would love to pioneer that here in Minnesota as potentially a pilot for other cities nationally.
Yeah, I think for us, it's kind of just given this moment, it's kind of difficult to see beyond, like see long term, which we actually have a strategic planning session to do that this upcoming weekend. But where I've always imagined our organization and wanted us to be is to, in the same way that, which we don't align with them very much, but like the New York Times or the Washington Post, how they are like these they're based and named after cities, but they have international influence. They impact international politics, but they're still based in their specific cities. That's kind of like the level of influence that I would want our organization to have for people all across the Black diaspora, the African diaspora. And especially since we saw like Africa Stream, for instance, I know what really was like under attack essentially and isn't as active as they previously were. And so I think that there's a lack of African diaspora media. And so being able to help bridge that connection is something that we are interested in. So that's kind of on both having more influence at the international scale, also in the national realm. Both of those things are of interest to us. Broadly, just having, as I mentioned, we only have one full-time reporter right now. And so just generally expanding the amount of reporters and the amount of coverage that we're able to provide, because I think generally, like more left, very progressive Black media in the national space, I think is even still something that there's just not a lot of. And so being more in that space, and then also just at the state and local level, being able to provide more coverage, because there's unfortunately all kind of crazy things happening, even just in Missouri alone. And so being able to provide more coverage, we just produced our first ever documentary, I think about 2.5 months ago now. we're in the process of producing our second one. So that in and of itself is, as again, Georgia mentioned, a different format of media. And I think it just enables us to tell stories in a very different way. And it kind of like slows things down and allows us to go deeper into what we're covering. So being able to continue producing documentaries is something that we're interested in. All of that's on the editorial side. And then again, on the other half of the organization, expanding our mutual aid programs. So expanding the number of families that we're able to work with in our Hamer Free Food program, expanding the organizations that we partner with. Just broadly, our mutual aid programming ideally we're in the very early stages of our capital campaign to purchase an actual building. Right now, we're still renting from at the bookstore space, but we would like to actually purchase a building, because just again, going back to the history of the Black press and the importance of actual physical spaces in Black communities. So having an actual physical building is something that we plan to do. Yeah, I think those are just a few. So the mutual aid aspect growing how many cohorts and how many students we have in our Freedom School, growing our arts and culture programming, all of those, and just growing in a way that isn't too fast for ourselves also.
Excellent. All right, well, we'll move. Well, thank you for the discussion, and we'll move into our Q&A part for a few minutes. So we have a question from Wayne, and that is your thoughts on long form versus short form.
Well, they kind of answered it when they was speaking about their social media strategies and whatnot. Like you cater to the people that you cater to the people that are like attentive to your platform. So I mean, if y'all got any other extra input, that's fine.
Yeah, it just depends on the story, right? What best serves the story. I had this story that came across my desk about the disappearance of this man, and then he was found under very questionable circumstances, and the cause of death that was determined didn't match any of the evidence. And it was so nuanced, and like there was just so many different pieces, and I was like, oh my God, like how are we gonna put this into an article or like a 3-minute news package for social? And so we ended up breaking the format and doing something that we've never done before, and we did a 3-part audio series, and each episode was almost, I think, like an hour long. It's been a few years, but I think each episode was, it was definitely, each episode was more than 30 minutes, you know? And so it allowed us the time and space to comb through all of the nuances. But then, I mean, there's some other stories where doing like a quick, punchy video for TikTok is going to be more effective. So when you think of like short form or long form, I don't think when you're doing independent and you're producing for digital, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it just really depends on the story. What format is gonna best serve the story, and then two, what do you have the capacity and resources for? When you're small, when you're independent, sometimes you don't have the resources to do a whole long form documentary. Those take a lot of work, a lot of hours go into the editing, right? So I think both. I don't think it's long form or short form. I think it's both. And use your editorial discretion to choose which one's going to best serve the story.
Yeah, I would definitely agree 100%. I think also the very specific audience, this is something just that I just learned over time. For instance, if we're doing like accountability journalism on, for instance, like 2 weeks ago, as I mentioned, in our city council, they were wanting to build basically a World Cup jail because the World Cup is coming to Kansas City. They want to build a jail more or less to help quote unquote clean up the streets. and get like unhoused people off the streets and stuff like that. And the company that they are going to be contracting with, through some investigation I did, I found was the same company that built Guantanamo Bay. It's the same company that has been complicit in human trafficking, all kinds of like horrific crimes, essentially. And so when I have stories that are more like accountability, that I want to have like a real policy impact, oftentimes I'll publish those actually through our email newsletter, because our email newsletter has like a lot of politicians and faith leaders and nonprofit leaders who follow our email newsletter, or I might publish it on our website just because it has more authority and legitimacy on our website sometimes, versus if a student reached out to me and has like a racist situation happening in their school. Oftentimes those are actually, sometimes we posted quite a few of those stories only on our Instagram platform. And that's because that's where all the like the young kids are. And so it might just go viral on Instagram. And we actually don't even need to publish anything about it on our actual website. And so I think, again, like Georgia mentioned, that which audience that we're trying to reach, that has a lot to do with like how long or short. And then the last piece, I think, is, again, to what Georgia mentioned, really sometimes like how big do we think this story is? How robust is it? If I have a feeling that this is going to be like a national story, then oftentimes I'll have our team do like every platform, basically, because a lot of times people will just steal your stuff also. Even after you put in a lot of work to like put the story together, people will just take your like if you don't put a watermark on the pictures and stuff, people will just take it and just do whatever. And so if we think that the story is like a very big story, oftentimes we'll publish it on our website, so there is like the SEO value, and so that there's like that source material. And then we'll also publish it across all platforms as well. But again, yeah, definitely is like on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, our next question is from Shernay Williams. How much time do you dedicate per week or month to seeking funding, whether that's applying for grants, planning pitches, seeking sponsorships, etc.?
A lot. No, I wish I didn't spend as much time as I do. I feel like it's like the bane of the work, because I'd rather just be telling the stories, but we gotta keep the lights on. We gotta keep our people paid. So I don't know like an estimated amount of hours, just because it fluctuates. If we have a big deadline, I'm leaning in. I'm making sure, that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's on the big proposals we're submitting. And then there might be a month where we don't have a big deadline. So I also try to outsource that. That's one of the things that we actually did find a grant writer who's really, really good. And so she takes the lead on the nonprofit side. I still have to bottom line that work on the for-profit side, but it definitely lightens the load. So it could be anywhere from 25 hours a week to 0 hours a week. It really just depends.
Yeah, definitely similar for me. I spent way more time, but of course, before I had a development director, having to do like grant writing and all that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier around not putting the pressure on yourself to publish like every single day or even publish every single week, because sometimes there might be a week where I'm like all in on social media and responding to every DM and reporting and investigating and doing interviews. And then the very next week, I might not be doing any journalism at all. And I'm like all in on filling out grant applications and sending like 20 LinkedIn messages to cold messages to people, hitting up some people maybe who I previously knew who might be able to connect me somewhere else. So I think it's just, it's like a very big fluctuation. for sure.
I also think it's so easy to get like immersed in that. Like you're in Utah right now, and so while technically maybe some people wouldn't constitute that as like seeking funding, you are like rubbing shoulders with national funders, right? And so I think now there's certain events where I'm like, oh, I know I have to be there because there's going to be, the majority of our funders are going to be at this thing, and it's going to be a great opportunity to get in front of them and to strengthen our relationship with them. And so I don't always like in my mind segment that as, oh, these are fundraising hours, but really it is, it's you're kind of always on.
Yeah, I think to that also, that kind of like I mentioned prior to starting the Defender, I was in PR, and even like my media relations PR, knowing like we do a lot of PR literally on our own newsroom, just like trying to keep ourselves in media basically. And so that is also something that that's like, you wouldn't think of it as fundraising time that you're spending, but making sure that you are, as much as you're able to, trying to like stay on the front of funders' minds, or being seen in like newsletters, or getting in Neiman Labs or something like that. Those are kind of very much like, if not fundraising opportunities themselves, they make it a lot easier when you actually do meet people to actually do fundraising. And so I think yeah, if you go to our site, you'll see anytime we do any of our mutual aid stuff, number one, of course, we're doing it for the community, but we also have to publicize it as well for us, because like that is just important to help us continue to be able to get funding.
Yes. All right. Our next question is from Toby Lyles. Have you had any other political pushback outside of the decrease in DEI funding? And then I'll continue to read. I like the idea of a network, but do you have a strategy to protect your businesses from any politically based attention within the next few years?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been, in my opinion, political pushback on our work. I mean, I've received direct calls on Saturday morning from elected officials who don't like certain stories that we've published. I've received death threats. That is really consistent at this point. That is kind of normal, unfortunately. And there was also a person who we interviewed that was arrested by federal agents right outside of our office. And so, yes, there's definitely been political pushback in a number of different ways. And I had the chance to interview Stacey Abrams a few weeks ago, and I asked her, how is she staying hopeful in this moment? And one of the things that she said that just inspired me a lot personally was, I'm the granddaughter and great great granddaughter of slaves, and our ancestors were able to overcome and persevere. Such heinous and violent oppression that we should be hopeful that we can pull through this moment. And so when Ryan was like, it's really hard to vision for the future in such uncertain times, that hit home for me. But at the same time, it is that deep visioning and dreaming that keeps me inspired every day, even when the feds are snatching up people outside of our office, right? Even when we're getting death threats. And so when I think about building something in 2030, I'm optimistically hopeful that we'll have a new federal government by then. And so there won't be as much of a direct attack on defunding and attacking our work. However, I'm also very optimistic. That my legacy, if I wasn't able to publish one more story, like my legacy today leaves me on the right side of history. And so I'm just a person, even in business, that walks by faith and, willing to put in the hard work to build the big, crazy vision, but also willing to accept that there is so much that's stacked against us, and there's so much well organized, funded opposition and resistance to our work, that it's not going to be an easy journey. And so, we're taking it one day at a time and just doing what we can and continuing to dream crazy big and, hoping for the best outcomes, but also preparing for the worst.
Definitely, yep. Very similar for me. And I think one of the biggest ways of protecting ourselves, I think really is being active in the community and like being like we're doing like this free food program. We have like our freedom school, and just like showing up on the ground very consistently in the community. To me, it's like if or when something did happen to any of us, like we know the community's gonna turn up and show out. And to me, that's like one of the really only forms of like actual real protection that we can have in a time like this, is knowing like we are very local. And so we know if anything happens to us, we know our people will show up. We're connected to a lot of community organizations. They'll also show up. We're connected to like civil rights organizations and stuff too. And so I think just really making an emphasis to like actually be really well connected in your community and showing up in your community and building relationships with people in your community. To me, yeah, I don't know that there's much other ways of like protecting, because yeah, they can come after us in as we're already seeing, they can come after us in a wide variety of ways. But I think also to the point of like what is hopeful is I'm seeing like a lot of awakening of people. I'm seeing like people getting agitated in a positive way, like eyes being opened. I'm seeing young people who are using social media platforms in very innovative ways. Even us, as I mentioned, when I started The Defender, it was with 5 high school interns, and I gave them like a lot of editorial freedom, really. And so I think that with these new platforms, there's a crazy amount of surveillance and misinformation and all that kind of stuff. But there's also like very interesting, exciting things that, and ways that young people are using these new platforms to disseminate information and to organize also.
Great. Well, thank you. And this concludes our portion where we just have our discussion with you all. This has been amazing. And I know our guests have really learned a lot from your stories and everything that you shared. And we appreciate your time. I'm going to bring on our chair, task force chair, Shernay, to just go over more about our NABJ Entrepreneur Task Force. But thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Ryan. We are here to support you in any way we can through NABJ, and we're always here. So thank you, and I'll pass it on to Shernay.
Yes, absolutely. This was amazing. Thank you both for being so candid about the realities of this work, and how it was born out of a necessity for both of you because the current coverage wasn't up to par. And you have created so many opportunities for, people in the community. And of course, you're telling these important stories. And so this was a dynamic conversation that we truly appreciate. Want to have more of these conversations with everyone. And yes, like Lisa said, please continue to stay in this realm. We heard about the need for networks, right? And support. And that's really what we want to do here, is to bridge those gaps for people. There may have been some people who are watching this now or watching the replay, and they're like, okay, I'm dreaming about this, but how do I actually make this happen? And so hearing your stories, makes it real for people. It helps to lay the groundwork for them to do what they need to do. And with that in mind, we want to say that we want to continue to offer sessions like this. We're working on our next one for November. The date is going to be TBA, but we had some inspiration today from people who are, journalists on the ground doing the work. In November, we want to actually bring in some organizations that can support as well. So like the Tiny News Collective. They work with small independent publishers, Lion Publishers, the local independent online news publishers, is another organization that provides resources. So we want to also talk about these networks that you can tap into, right, as you're starting to build. And Wayne is going to lead that session in November. We also want to invite everybody in the task force. Right. You can also lead a session like Lisa just did. And that's what we encourage. Right. So if there's a topic that you want to cover, maybe, I don't know if it's, newsletters, if it's, starting whatever it is. Right. If you have ideas on topics that we should cover, people we want to reach out to, then let's do it. Right. And so then you can be the one that is getting that experience. Of course, talking to people. This is also about building connections, right, for whatever future work you have in mind. So we want you to be involved. So definitely reach out to us. I think we can drop the email in there for everyone to reach out. We also are trying to build up our committees as well. So if you want to help with us managing our social media channels, with planning programming for the national convention, all those things, just let us know. I put the link to the email list, right? If you want to join our email list. And I know that Wayne dropped the socials as well. So yes, we're getting all the applause for the great conversations that we had. Thank you again, Georgia and Ryan. But yeah, that's really all I have. This was great. We want to keep it going. So let's do it. Thank you all. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.